They said she ran away, that she was troubled, confused, a ghost who simply drifted off into the Texas wind. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't even begin to imagine, was that behind the mirror of a seemingly ordinary house, a girl named Rachel was forced to forget her own name. And she wasn't the only one. For decades, a hidden network of psychological experiments operated in silence, built not with chains, but with blueprints. Not by monsters, but by architects. And when the truth finally clawed its way back into the light, it didn't arrive with sirens or justice. It arrived with a name carved into wood. This is the story of those who vanished, and the few who came back. Not broken, but remembered. Welcome to the case that changed everything. They came to Oceanside Bluffs for peace. That was the word Rachel Monroe used when she booked the last-minute rental on Sandglass Drive in July of 1997, just a peaceful week away. She said it twice to the agent at Seabreeze Realty. My husband and I really need some peace. Ethan Monroe, 34, worked in downtown Atlanta in property development. Rachel, 32, had recently left her job teaching literature at a private school after a miscarriage that left a wound no doctor could name. So, they packed light. A single duffel each, a cooler, 2 books, and a shared belief that the salt air might cleanse the quiet ache between them. House number 42, with its warped porch steps and faded pink shutters, had a view of the dunes and just enough charm to pass as romantic on paper. But something inside the house had never exhaled properly. The previous renters had checked out early. One claimed a strange buzzing came from the bathroom pipes. Another, a family from Charleston, left in the middle of the night after their 5-year-old daughter woke up screaming about a mirror girl. The house was discounted. The property manager said it needed some TLC. But the Monroes weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for stillness. On the morning of July 21st, the cleaning staff arrived just after 10. The young woman who came to reset the house for the next guests, a seasonal employee named Becky Hall, remembered knocking on the door and waiting the standard 5 minutes before entering. What she stepped into was not chaos, nor violence, but something stranger. Suspension. The AC was running. A paperback novel sat open on the coffee table, spine broken, with a wine glass beside it, half full. The master bedroom had only one side of the bed disturbed. 2 toothbrushes still rested in the bathroom cup. Beach towels, damp, hung over the back porch railing. The couple's rental car, a silver Dodge Stratus with Georgia plates, remained in the driveway. Their bags were still in the closet. Nothing was missing, except them. And one other thing, the bathroom mirror. It had been ripped clean from the wall, screws bent outward, the drywall jagged where the glass had once been. Becky thought it was odd but said nothing. She cleaned the house, locked up, and returned the keys to the office. It wasn't until the property manager tried to contact the Monroes about their checkout, and couldn't, that anyone realized something was deeply wrong. When local sheriff deputies arrived later that day, the house was in the exact same state. There were no signs of forced entry, no blood, no fingerprints out of place. The water in the shower was still running. According to the utility report, it had likely been on for 6 to 8 hours. That's what made Detective Marcus Holloway pause all those years later when he reopened the file. A shower doesn't run that long without a reason. A mirror doesn't vanish unless someone wants it to. And people, real people, don't vanish into nothing with their shoes still by the bed and the wine still on the table. But that was the narrative etched into the record. Ethan and Rachel Monroe, married 6 years, no children, no debts, no enemies, checked into a house by the sea and never came out. The case faded like so many others. A few headlines in the local press, a week of interviews. Then the tide took it. But houses remember. And number 42 remembered everything. Over the next 2 decades, it became a strange fixture on the rental market. Too picturesque to be avoided, too unsettling to be truly desirable. Guests left early. One woman claimed her dog refused to enter the master bathroom. Another filed a noise complaint, scraping sounds from the tub drain at night. But no one investigated beyond casual curiosity until April 2024. That was when Sierra Donovan, a 34-year-old furniture restorer from Asheville, inherited a modest sum from her late mother and decided to start over. She'd grown tired of the city, of grief with nowhere to go. A beach house, she thought, would be healing. Her husband Ryan agreed. They found a foreclosure listing online. It was cheap, too cheap. But they weren't superstitious. The ocean doesn't keep secrets, Sierra said to herself when they signed the paperwork, and for 2 weeks it seemed true. The wind blew clean. The sun painted soft shadows through the slatted blinds. Sierra began renovations, restoring baseboards, ripping out old tile. Then, on a Wednesday morning in May, she scrubbed mildew from the back wall of the master shower and felt the faintest give beneath her palm. The tile was loose, not cracked or broken, but soft, like something breathing beneath. She pressed again. The tile flexed, and from somewhere behind the wall, she thought, just for a moment, she heard breathing. Not the wind, not the sea. Breathing. She didn't say anything to Ryan that day, but that night she couldn't sleep. The wind pushed against the windows like it wanted in. And downstairs, in the bathroom, something shifted. Something very old and very quiet. The next morning, Sierra picked up a screwdriver, and the house exhaled. Sierra didn't wake Ryan right away. Some instincts don't need permission. At 7:14 a.m., with the spring sunlight crawling in strips across the tile, she crouched barefoot inside the master bathroom and pressed her ear to the wall. Nothing. No breath, no vibration. Just a chill seeping through the porcelain like the house had cooled overnight from the inside out. But the memory of that soft give beneath her palm haunted her, and as the steam from the morning shower curled upward, she noticed it again. The faint shift, the imperceptible tremble. "Not grout," she whispered. "Not normal." So she fetched the flathead screwdriver from the kitchen drawer and began prying tile by tile. Ryan eventually found her there, hair tied back, jeans dusted with adhesive crumbs, her face serious and low to the floor. "You planning on tearing down the whole house?" he asked, joking, but her answer was simple. "I think there's a wall inside the wall." 23 minutes later, after he tapped the hollow space himself, Ryan stopped smiling. What followed was a slow, almost surgical dissection. Tile, then sheetrock, then a thin panel of plywood warped with age. The final crack of it splintered like a rib breaking, and behind it, dust poured forward in a lazy, almost deliberate exhale. A space revealed itself. Narrow, maybe 3 feet deep, boxed in by beams and insulation so old it looked like spiderwebs had woven themselves into the structure. Sierra turned on her phone flashlight and leaned in. At first, it was just cobwebs and rusty nails, maybe a bit of old insulation clumped like animal fur. But then she saw it. A shred of pale fabric. She tugged. It gave with a reluctant rip, revealing the upper half of a shirt, dusty blue, frayed at the collar, the kind worn in the mid-90s. Something in the way it had been stuffed, no, folded, felt intentional, deliberate. Ryan leaned over her shoulder, silent. Sierra's light moved lower, tracing the wood paneling at the base of the crawl space. That's when she saw them. Scratches. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens. Long, shallow at first, then deeper, angrier. Gouged crescents clawed into the wood like someone had tried to escape with their bare hands. A cold burst of nausea hit her ribs. She reached in again, further this time, and her fingers brushed something cool and metallic. When she pulled it out, her breath caught. A charm bracelet, delicate silver, still faintly warm from her skin. A starfish, a sandal, and a heart engraved with 3 letters, RM, Rachel Monroe. "Peter," she said, voice cracking, "this wasn't storage." Ryan looked at the wall, then at her, then at the bracelet in her hand. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Someone was in there." Within 2 hours, the house was ringed in flashing lights. Local deputies taped off the bathroom as Detective Marcus Holloway stepped inside, gray-streaked hair tied back, expression carved from years of unresolved endings. He stood still as the forensic officers swept the crawl space with cameras and tweezers, documenting every inch. Holloway's voice was low but precise. "Monroe case," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Sierra stood outside the door, arms crossed, hoodie streaked with paint and dust. "What case?" Holloway turned to her. "July 1997, Rachel and Ethan Monroe vanished from this house. Last seen at a grocery store off Route 17. No signs of struggle. Car still in the driveway. Clothes in the closet. Shower running." Sierra swallowed, remembering the sound of the shower from just days before. And now this crawl space. Holloway pulled a small zip bag from his coat and held it up. Inside was the bracelet. That charm was listed in the original report. Rachel was wearing it the night she disappeared. Ryan stepped beside Sierra, pale. "So what now?" Holloway's eyes swept the cavity behind them. "Now," he said evenly, "we dig." By nightfall, the master bathroom looked like a surgery in progress. Drywall removed, studs exposed, insulation peeled like old skin. The breeze that rolled off the ocean carried salt, mildew, and the faint coppery scent of aged blood. Sierra stood on the edge of the dunes, the house behind her wrapped in yellow tape like a warning. Ryan slipped an arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" She nodded, but her voice was flat. That tile was holding a secret for 30 years. He followed her gaze toward the broken space. "What kind of secret?" She didn't answer, not right away, but her mind filled with the image of those scratches, the bracelet, the shirt, the silence that had hummed behind the walls, and in her gut, she knew this hadn't been an accident. Not a break-in, not a robbery. This was intentional, controlled. Someone had trapped her in there. And maybe, just maybe, someone had watched Dot. By the morning of May 3rd, the house no longer belonged to Sierra and Ryan, not really, not in any way that felt ordinary. It had become something else, a body dissected, its bones exposed, its secrets extracted piece by piece under floodlights and the quiet footfalls of forensic boots. Sierra stood behind the police barricade, cradling a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, watching a white van reverse into the gravel driveway with a precision that made her stomach tighten. Another van was already parked by the curb, its rear doors flung open, cables trailing out like veins. Extension cords coiled across the sand, winding into the house as investigators wheeled in equipment. Tripods, scanners, a portable GPR unit designed to detect cavities beneath floors and inside walls. The lead vehicle bore the stenciled letters, Currituck County Cold Case Unit. Detective Holloway emerged from the front seat without ceremony, wearing jeans, a dark windbreaker, and the face of a man who had given up on ever being shocked. He glanced at Sierra with a faint nod. "You sure you want to be here for this?" She didn't blink. "I want to know what you find." Holloway didn't argue. He rarely did. He just motioned toward the master bathroom and disappeared inside. The crawlspace was larger than it had first appeared. Once his team removed the inner panel, stripped the damp insulation, and scanned the structural beams, they discovered that the void ran nearly the full length of the bathroom wall. Inside, beneath the aged plywood floor, they found more. 2 long, dark hairs clinging to a cobweb strung between joists. A pink plastic comb snapped in half. A single white flip-flop with a faded seashell print. And then, deeper, more scratches. This time horizontal, etched with such precision and depth they could only have come from human fingernails, raked again and again in the same direction. One officer tapped along the far panel with a hollow plastic rod, listening. The sound changed near the base of the corner beam, subtle but definite. Holloway nodded once. "Scan it." The tech moved quickly, wheeling in the GPR, its dish-like scanner sweeping the wall in slow arcs. A tablet screen flickered with colored lines, noise, data. Then she stopped, pointed. "There's a second cavity here, smaller. Vertical, maybe 5 feet tall, 18 inches wide, and here, metal objects." "You saying there's another room?" Holloway asked. "Not exactly," she replied. "Could be a defect, could be intentional, but the density's wrong." Holloway crouched near the baseboard, tapping gently on the tile. "This was hidden on purpose." He straightened, scanning his team. "Get me a microcam and a drill. We're going in." Sierra watched from the edge of the living room as the wall camera was snaked through a fresh borehole just wide enough to allow the fiber optic lens to pass. The image appeared grainy and green-tinted on the monitor, lit only by the camera's onboard LED. What it revealed stole the air from the room. A full-length mirror, mounted behind the wall, facing inward. The lens panned slightly. Pink wallpaper. Peeling at the seams, a child-sized mattress. A tiny plastic vanity, the kind sold in department stores in the 90s. And along the wall, stuffed animals, slumped in a neat row, a hidden room, a girl's room. Not in any blueprint, not in any permit. Just buried behind the drywall like a fossil of horror. Holloway stared at the monitor. "We've got a recon lab in Durham. I want this wall removed carefully, section by section. Everything's evidence now." He turned to Sierra. "We're going to need you and your husband to vacate the house. We'll arrange compensation through the state." Sierra's voice was hollow. "That's a child's room." Holloway nodded slowly. "Yeah, and this is still the Monroe case. They went missing here, yes, but What we just found, his voice dropped to a whisper. This might not be just about them anymore. Back at the precinct that evening, Holloway laid the original Monroe file across a metal table in the cold case archive. It was thinner than it should have been. 2 missing persons, no bodies, no physical evidence, just photographs, a few interviews, and a guestbook entry dated August 16th, 1997. It read, "Storm rolling in. Might stay a few more days. Ethan said this place feels too quiet." The last words Rachel Monroe ever wrote publicly. Holloway turned the page and froze. Item 24. The housekeeper's statement. Her name was Shirley Gates. She had been 17 at the time. Her report mentioned a smell of bleach in the bathroom, water still running, and, this part underlined in pencil, she thought she heard music behind the wall. The officer on duty had written it off as stress. Shirley had called it faint, like a child's lullaby, playing through the mirror. No one had listened. No one had looked. And now, almost 3 decades later, they were pulling back walls and uncovering rooms that should never have existed. That night, Sierra and Ryan checked into a motel 3 blocks from the crime scene. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her phone, zooming in on an old newspaper photo of Rachel and Ethan. They looked happy. Ethan had a crooked smile. Rachel was holding an ice cream cone, but her wrist, that same bracelet, starfish. Flip-flop, heart, RM, Ryan leaned over her shoulder. "That's the one?" Sierra nodded, but her mind was somewhere else. "Do you think she died in there?" Ryan didn't answer. He didn't have to. After a long pause, Sierra whispered the words that would not leave her. "I don't think she was alone." The morning light that crept across Oceanside Bluffs on May 4th felt brittle, like it didn't belong to the day at all, but was borrowed from something older, colder, already fading. Detective Marcus Holloway didn't sleep. He rarely did when a case began speaking in voices long buried, and the Monroe case was beginning to whisper again. His first call that day was to an assisted living facility in nearby Beaufort, where Shirley Gates, formerly the housekeeper who had discovered the vacant rental in 1997, now lived in apartment 2B, her window overlooking the marshlands and the slow, shallow water that never seemed to move. Shirley, now in her 60s, looked frail, but her eyes still held the sharp clarity of someone who had once noticed something the rest of the world had ignored. She didn't need Holloway to introduce himself. "You're here about the shower house," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. Holloway blinked. "Excuse me?" She pointed vaguely toward the coast. "That's what we called it, because the damn shower wouldn't stop running." She leaned back in her recliner, thin fingers steepled. "The day I found their stuff, the water was still going, like it had been left for someone else." Holloway opened his notebook. "You were the one who entered the scene." She didn't hesitate. "August 18th, 1997. It was a Monday. I always cleaned Mondays after the Sunday turnover. I parked out front and saw the car still there. Georgia plates, Dodge Stratus. I thought maybe they overslept. Used the master key. And the second I walked in," she paused, her voice lowering, "I knew something was wrong." Holloway let the silence stretch. Shirley folded her hands. It was too quiet, not a peaceful kind of quiet, a listening kind, like I was being waited for. The AC wasn't running, which was strange for July. The clock radio wasn't playing. But the bathroom was steam and bleach, thick, like someone tried to erase something. The shampoo bottles were knocked over. One of the towels was twisted up like someone had wrung it out in panic. But the part that stayed with me, her voice faltered. The mirror. I cleaned that mirror 3 times, but there were still smudges, streaks, not random, like hands, forehead pressed against it, like someone had been pleading. Holloway scribbled, then glanced up as Shirley's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I heard music, not loud, not normal, faint, a melody, from behind the wall. Holloway's pen froze. "What kind of music?" "Child's music box, maybe." I told the deputy. Lane, I think his name was. He said I was overtired. Marked it as auditory stress response. But I wasn't tired. I was scared. She paused again, blinking into the distance. It didn't feel like a missing person case. It felt like the house swallowed them. Back at number 42 Sandglass Drive, Holloway stood once more inside the gutted bathroom. The tile was gone. The walls were ribs. The air was cooler now, but it held the faint aftertaste of mildew and something older, like dust that remembered blood. The forensic team had finished excavating the crawl space. Now they were focused on the secret chamber, the child's room, with its two-way mirror and soft pink wallpaper. A profiler from the bureau was already on site. She stood arms crossed, reviewing the layout with narrowed eyes. "This wasn't slapped together," she murmured. "This was engineered." When Holloway asked what she meant, she turned slowly. "Someone with time, money, experience in carpentry or facilities. Maybe military. The insulation was doubled, probably to muffle noise. The air duct wasn't aligned with any HVAC function. That mirror? Observation glass? The kind used in interrogation rooms. And those scratches on the wall?" She pointed to the gouges below the mirror's frame. "She was trying to get out, for a long time." Holloway crouched and traced one set of them with a gloved finger. "No signs of Ethan?" The tech nearby shook his head. "No male DNA yet. Only female mitochondrial matches." The implication rang out louder than the words. Rachel Monroe had been inside that room. And maybe only her. Later that evening, Sierra was granted permission to briefly return to the property, escorted by an officer. She walked through the living room like it was a dream. Her dream, reversed and gutted and lined with crime scene markers. Her footsteps echoed where furniture once sat. The house no longer resembled what they bought. It looked flayed, like something had been peeled open and could never be closed again. She paused near the bathroom. "Did they find anything else?" she asked quietly. Holloway, walking beside her, nodded once. 2 toothbrushes, one female, one male. Traces of blood under the female handle. Could be gum bleeding. Could be something else. She stared into the hollow wall where the mirror had been. "Do you ever feel," she said, her voice thin, "like a house is trying to tell you something?" Holloway didn't smile, but his mouth twitched. "I think this one's been screaming for decades." That night, in a dusty county archive, Holloway found something that had been missed. A scanned microfiche of the original Monroe rental contract. 7 nights, August 10th to August 17th, 1997. But at the bottom, in faint pencil, was a scrawled addendum. Extended 3 days, paid in cash, confirmed by PM call. No signature, no initials, just a number. Traced to a now demolished payphone outside the Coral Pines Lodge. No records, no footage. But someone had extended the Monroe stay after they were already gone. Someone had made sure they stayed longer. Someone who knew the house wasn't just shelter. It was a trap. And the walls were watching Dot. Detective Holloway left the archive with a name. Not a full one. Not yet. But a thread. And sometimes, a thread was all a case needed to unspool itself. The payphone listed at the bottom of the Monroe rental extension had been located outside the Coral Pines Lodge, a cheap roadside motel 20 miles south of Oceanside Bluffs, now long gone. Demolished in 2004 after a string of violations and rumors no one ever formally investigated. Still, records remained. Scattered, fragile, yellowed with time. Back at the precinct, Holloway pulled every rental log, maintenance note, and staff file he could find tied to the Coral Pines. Most had been boxed and stored, never digitized. And there, between a guest checkout list from August 1997 and a handwritten repair order for mirror replacement room 9, he found a name. Gerald Stone, paid in cash. No ID provided. Stayed in room 9 on August 17th, the exact day the Monroes were scheduled to check out. When Holloway tracked down Beatrice Morton, the former cleaning staffer who had once worked the Coral Pines circuit, she didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I remember him," she said, flipping through a brittle scrapbook of old Polaroids and room keys. Tall, wore the same windbreaker every time, back always to the lobby, real quiet. Said his name was Stone, but I don't think that was true. Holloway leaned in. "Did he ever come with anyone?" Beatrice paused, brow furrowing. "Once," she said finally. "He had a little girl with him, real quiet, never said a word. She carried a doll with no face, just blank cloth, one button eye." She tapped a photo. "That's room 9 right there. He stayed there 3 times, twice alone, once with the girl." Holloway studied the image. Nothing stood out, just a plain sun-bleached room, cracked wallpaper, and a vent above the mirror. But something about it felt wrong, too symmetrical, too watched. "Was the mirror in that room replaced in 97? He asked. Beatrice nodded. "Said it cracked. I remember because he had me sign the delivery slip. But it wasn't the regular mirror. It was thicker, weirdly heavy." Holloway's pen stopped. "Did you ever see inside the room after he left?" "No," she said softly. "He always told me to leave the towels at the door. said his guest was sensitive to sound. That evening, Holloway drove to what remained of the Coral Pines, a Dollar General, a vape shop, and a patch of cracked concrete that still bore the faded ghost of parking lines. He stood where room 9 used to be and closed his eyes. The breeze was warm, but beneath it, the faint scent of rust and damp cement remained. A county historian met him there with a laminated blueprint of the original motel layout. Room 9 faced east, she explained. 2 vents, 1 window, mirror closet added in 97. She pointed to a smudged notation near the corner. That's the only one like it. Holloway nodded slowly. The mirror had not been decorative, it had been purpose-built. The implication was growing clearer by the hour. Room 9 wasn't just a room, it was an audition space, a place to test behavior. And the house on Sandglass Drive? That was the final performance. The next day, Holloway tracked down a surviving maintenance worker named Hank Dillard, now 71, and living in quiet obscurity 2 towns inland. They met at a diner just off the highway. Hank sipped black coffee and avoided eye contact. "You worked room 9? Holloway asked. "Sometimes." "You remember a man named Gerald Stone?" Hank's jaw tightened. "Yeah, too polite. Always exact change. Creeped me out." Holloway slid a photo across the table, one of the crime scene Polaroids from Sandglass. It showed a pale woman, hands bound, slumped against the pink wall of the hidden room. In the mirror behind her stood a man, half lit, holding a camera. Hank studied it. Then slowly, deliberately, nodded. "That's him," he whispered. "But that ain't the beach house. That's the motel. Look at the baseboards. That's room 9, and that mirror, I put it in." Holloway leaned forward, pulse quickening. He had it delivered. Told me to mount it tight, no light gaps. Said it was for his guest project. "Did you know who the girl was?" Hank looked down. "No, but I found something once, before they tore the place down." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a wrinkled envelope. Inside was a photograph, black and white, curled at the edges. A young girl, maybe 6, sitting cross-legged on a motel bed. Her face blurred in motion. She clutched a faceless doll, and behind her, reflected in the mirror, stood the man in the windbreaker. On the back of the photo, scrawled in red ink, were the words, "Kay learns quickly. We'll try again if this one fails." Holloway sat back in stunned silence. This was bigger than a missing couple. Rachel Monroe wasn't the first. She was the replacement. And if she was replaced, that meant the first girl, the one in the motel photo, hadn't made it out at all. Back at the precinct, Holloway cross-checked facial recognition from the photo with a missing persons database. The match came through less than an hour later. Lila Hartley, age 6, disappeared July 1996. Last seen in Chesapeake, Virginia. She had vanished from a grocery store parking lot while her mother was distracted. No leads, no suspects. The case went cold in 11 days. Now, Holloway held her face in his hands. Now, he had her name. The girl with the button-eyed doll. The original Rose Room ghost. And she had never been lost. She had been locked away, tested, conditioned. And when she failed, replaced. The question now wasn't just who built the rooms, it was who kept them, full dot. The forensic team returned to Sandglass Drive at first light, the house now surrounded by vans, mobile labs, and men and women in Tyvek suits moving with the precision of surgeons about to open a patient who had survived too long in silence. Detective Holloway stood at the rear of the property, staring at the northwest support beam where a cadaver dog had signaled twice the day before, its bark sharp, insistent, and filled with something almost panicked. Ground-penetrating radar had confirmed the anomaly, an object approximately 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, buried beneath just under 2 feet of compacted sand and warped plywood scraps. Holloway gave the order. Shovels went in. The digging was careful, reverent, more like an archaeological extraction than a crime scene recovery. By 8:40 a.m., they uncovered what first appeared to be a sealed cot, wrapped in black plastic and bound in duct tape that had long since turned the color of old ash. It took 3 people to lift it out. The smell was immediate, sweet, acidic, unmistakable. Inside, beneath layers of decayed bedding and crumbling foam padding, were bones. Small, disarticulated, a child. The forensic anthropologist said little, only crouched beside the cot with gloved hands and a notebook. "Likely female," she said at last. 5 to 6 years old, maybe younger depending on malnutrition. Missing several teeth. Pelvic development consistent with prepubescence. Holloway stood motionless, staring down at what they had found. He didn't need a name. He already had one. Lila Hartley. The girl from room 9. The girl in the photograph. The girl with the faceless doll. Her life had ended not with a headline, not with a search party, but here, beneath a house designed to house more than people. It was a graveyard wrapped in drywall and pink wallpaper. Sierra Donovan arrived just as they were sealing the evidence bag. She wasn't supposed to be there, but Holloway didn't stop her. She stood at the property's edge, hair pinned back, hands jammed into the sleeves of her oversized cardigan. Her eyes didn't blink. "That's not Rachel," she said, almost as a plea. "No," Holloway replied. "It's not." She turned toward the ocean, silent, then back at him. "So there's more." He didn't answer, not with words. But later that night, as the team dismantled the guest bathroom wall paneling, another discovery was made, one that stopped Holloway mid-step. A vertical chute ran from the back of the medicine cabinet into a box-shaped void beneath the floor. Inside, they found decades-old refuse, shredded wrappers, broken plastic forks, decomposed cloth, and at the bottom, buried in dust and crumpled tissue paper, a Polaroid. Holloway peeled it carefully from the wall and held it up to the light. It showed Rachel Monroe, unmistakably her, eyes wide, hand pressed against the mirror. On the back, scrawled in thick red marker, were 4 words. "She still resists. Replacement pending." The writing was angry, impatient, like a failed experiment about to be discarded. Holloway set it down and turned away. Across the room, Sierra was staring at the exposed studs as if trying to will them to speak. "She survived, didn't she?" she whispered. "At least for a while." Holloway nodded. "The scratches, the blood, the bracelet." Then he added, almost reluctantly, "the food tray." She blinked. "What tray?" "Back in '97, he said. "Delilah, the housekeeper, mentioned a takeout tray in the fridge. Thought it was from a restaurant. Plastic wrap, single portion, but the kitchen was otherwise spotless." He paused. "We reanalyzed it this week. Inside the folded napkin, the lab found a bright pink fiber." "The same pink?" Sierra asked. "As the rose room walls?" "Same synthetic match." His voice was grim. "Someone moved it. From the crawlspace. Into the fridge. Like they wanted to leave a note. Or they made a mistake." That evening, Holloway tracked down Melanie Sykes, the assistant property manager who had worked under Lawrence Maddox, still known to the world, for now, as Gerald Stone. She met him at a quiet cafe, visibly shaken. "I don't know anything," she said, before he even opened his mouth. "He never involved me in anything." Holloway slid a photo across the table. "You recognize this tile?" She studied the broken fragment. "Pink ceramic. He had me deliver a box of those to the Sandglass property. Said it was for a remodel, a theme bathroom. Said guests liked whimsy." Holloway didn't speak, just waited. "He told me never to go inside," she added after a pause. "Said the house wasn't ready." Later that night, Sierra lay awake in the motel bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind circled the same question again and again. Why keep them alive at all? Not just Rachel, but Lila. What kind of mind builds walls not to conceal death, but to contain life? She thought of the notes, the trays, the observation mirrors, the constant surveillance. It wasn't punishment. It was a test. Measured suffering, controlled obedience. She whispered to herself, they weren't just captives. They were subjects. Back at the house, Holloway stood in the rose room, now stripped bare. Beneath the insulation and paneling, another crude message had been scratched into the mirror's frame, this time with what looked like a rusted nail. The letters shaky, crooked, but unmistakable. "I remember my name. Rachel." He touched the letters with his gloved fingers. The voice of the house was growing louder now, and it had more to say. Dot. The house was speaking now in ways that no evidence report could fully translate, through the fevered etchings of a girl clawing her name into wood, through the still warm presence of hair strands caught in old nails, through the suffocating silence of a mirror no one had seen the other side of for nearly 3 decades. But it was a single artifact, buried in insulation in the attic corner of the rose room, that shifted everything from unspeakable horror into undeniable truth. One of the forensic technicians, carefully sweeping behind a false vent panel, uncovered a small glass jar, sealed tight, its lid rusted but intact. Inside, protected by a faded floral tissue, was a folded note written in rushed, panicked script. Holloway held it under a forensic lamp. The ink was smeared in places, but the handwriting, compared side by side with Rachel Monroe's DMV signature from 1995, was a match. If anyone finds this, my name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 33. I came here with my husband, Ethan. He is gone. I don't know how long I've been here. I don't know if this is real, but I'm still in here. Please don't leave me behind. There was no date, no timestamp, just desperation suspended in ink, waiting. Holloway didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, he whispered almost to himself. She wrote that after they declared her dead. The jar was preserved with enough care to suggest it wasn't tossed or hidden in a rush. It had been placed deliberately, which meant someone else knew it was there, someone who sealed it in, someone who wanted her never to be found. And the fingerprints on the inside of the jar lid confirmed that. They belonged to Lawrence Maddox, the very same man who had vanished from property records in 2001, the very same man whose name was never real. The discovery triggered a new wave of urgency. Every panel, every crawl space, every inch of wall was now suspect. Holloway ordered thermal sweeps and cross-scanning with structural blueprints. That's when they found the final anomaly, a hidden trapdoor tucked beneath the water heater in the rear of the house. No hinges, no latch, just a seam in the wood barely detectable without infrared. The team peeled back the boards slowly, and what opened beneath was no mere void. It was a tunnel. A narrow passage, shoulder width at most, descending into a space that had not seen light in nearly 30 years. They sent in a remote camera first, its lens trembling slightly as it was lowered by cable. The feed flickered onto the tablet. Sierra stood behind Holloway as the screen came into focus. A chamber, compact, sealed. On the floor, a mattress, threadbare and water-stained. A broken lamp. A plastic mirror cracked in two. A tether nailed to the corner post. And there, just to the side, a bundle of torn notebook pages. Holloway retrieved them himself. Most were smudged beyond recovery, but one remained legible, the writing small, crammed to the margins. He thinks I don't remember my name. He calls me something else now, but I write it here so I don't forget. Rachel. I count the days. I think I've been here 200, maybe more, but I know he's getting tired. He coughs at night. He forgets to lock the door sometimes. One day I'll go through it and I won't come back. Sierra's voice cracked as she read it. She escaped. Holloway nodded slowly. Or, she died trying. But Sierra didn't agree, not in her bones. She touched the trapdoor with her hand and whispered, no, she made it. And something in the air, somehow, agreed. As the forensic team continued processing, they uncovered the last heartbreaking confirmation. 2 sets of footprints. One smaller, bare, the other larger, booted, leading away from the tunnel and into the foundation wall, where a once sealed seam had clearly been pushed open from the inside, and beyond that seam, fresh air, a possible exit, a door into nowhere. She had gone, fled, vanished not into death, but into a life built on anonymity. Somewhere Rachel Monroe might still be alive. Holloway didn't speak until the final photo was recovered, wrapped in cloth, placed beneath a beam like a goodbye. It was Rachel, blurry, mid-motion, eyes wide but no longer frantic. She was turned slightly toward the mirror, and in her reflection there was no fear, only certainty. Holloway slid the photo into a new evidence folder. Sierra looked up. Where do we go from here? Holloway exhaled slowly. We stopped calling it a house. She blinked. Then what is it? And Holloway's voice, low and certain, delivered the truth no blueprint could conceal. It's a design, a behavior loop, a stage. Someone didn't just build this to hold people. They built it to shape them. The door wasn't meant to lock them in. It was meant to see who would stop trying to open it. Rachel hadn't. Lila hadn't. But only one of them ever got out. And now the walls that tried to forget them had finally begun to remember. Dot. The journal page haunted Sierra long after the tunnel was sealed and the house reclassified as an active criminal site. Every night at the motel, she sat with the same photograph folded in her lap. The image of Rachel Monroe, blurry yet unmistakably alive, caught mid-motion in the mirror that had watched her for months, maybe years. She couldn't stop thinking about the footprints, about the final scrawled words. He forgets to lock the door sometimes. Rachel had waited, measured, observed. And when her captor weakened, she slipped through a house designed to erase her. But the truth was, someone else had been watching too. Someone inside the house. And that someone had recorded more than footsteps. On May 6th, Holloway received word from the lab. Among the items retrieved from the Rose Room chute, beside the wrappers and toothbrush stubs, was a cassette tape buried beneath a crushed Kool-Aid box. Its reel brittle but playable. The tape was restored and cued in the lab's secure audio chamber. Holloway, Sierra, and 2 federal agents sat in silence as the machine clicked into motion. The first few seconds were static, then a hiss, then a small voice, barely audible. A child's. "I'm still in here." Sierra's skin went cold. Holloway turned up the volume. A man's voice followed, low and strained. "Teresa, please stop screaming. They'll hear us," Sierra gasped. "That's Ethan." Holloway nodded, jaw tightening. "I told you not to fight. You'll make it worse. Just stay in the princess room. Do what he says." There was a pause, then a sound that didn't belong on any cassette. Metal scraping, a hinge, then silence. Then, something darker. "He comes at night now. I hear the screws turning. He watches us through the vent. Teresa won't eat. She won't speak. I think she's gone in her mind." The voice was no longer steady. It trembled, cracked under pressure. "He said we'd be special, that we were the first, but not the last." Holloway shut off the tape. The room was dead quiet. No one dared move. Sierra's voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "He was helping?" Holloway shook his head slowly. "He was participating." DNA swabs from the ductwork confirmed 2 contributors, Lawrence Maddox and an unknown male. But that male profile came back as a partial match to someone in the Monroe family line. Ethan, the husband, the man who had disappeared alongside Rachel. He hadn't been a victim. He had been a caretaker, possibly even an apprentice. It made sense now. The food trays, the staggered feeding times, the way Rachel's captivity spanned longer than expected. There was always someone on the other side of the mirror, someone watching. But now it was no longer clear who the real prisoner had been. Holloway turned back to the forensic team. "Check everything again, every fingerprint, every hinge. I want every surface scanned. And dig up Ethan Monroe's background. Property licenses, mental health, military service, anything." Later that evening, as Sierra stared at the walls of their motel room, she couldn't stop hearing Ethan's voice. "Do what he says." It wasn't just resignation. It was ritual. Like something passed down, a script. And then, just before sleep, something hit her. "He said we were the first," she muttered aloud. Ryan looked up from his laptop. "Yeah?" "That means Maddox told him there'd be more. That this wasn't about Rachel, not just her." She paused. "This was planned." The following morning, Holloway received another lead. A sealed toolbox had been unearthed beneath a gardening shed on Ethan's parents' property in Williamsburg, Virginia. Inside, a VHS tape labeled Training DL, a woman's earring, and a burned page torn from a leather journal. Holloway read it aloud in the evidence room, his voice level but shaking beneath the surface. "I told him no at first, but she wouldn't listen. He said we could help her, that it was better than the world. He said we were making a home. I didn't think she'd stop talking. And then she did. Signed, Ethan Monroe." Sierra didn't cry when she read it. She just stared at the words. Then at the photo of Ethan and Rachel smiling with ice cream cones in 1996, and said quietly, "He built the lie." Holloway sat down beside her. "Not alone," he said. "Maddox built the walls, but Ethan built the story." They had presented themselves as a couple, a unit, a vacationing husband and wife. But what if that had always been a ruse? What if Rachel hadn't come to the house with Ethan? What if she had been brought there? The rental extension, the unsigned payment, the missing 3 days. It fit. It all fit. And it made the next discovery feel inevitable. Tucked behind a mirror panel recovered from the Rose Room, forensic investigators uncovered a final scratched message, so faint it took UV light to read it. "He calls me by a different name now. Says Rachel is gone, says I'm someone new. But I write it here so I don't forget. I still remember. I still remember." Sierra placed her hand over the letters, whispering through tears. She held on. The mirror that once reflected her terror had now become the only place her truth could survive. Rachel Monroe had not just resisted, she had recorded. Every scrawl, every page, every breath behind the mirror was her rebellion. And somewhere in the world, if she was still alive, she carried the memory of that room. Not as a victim, but as a witness. The house had shaped her. tried to erase her. But she had left her name behind in the only place no one thought to look, inside the walls. And now, finally, someone was listening. Dot. The walls of number 42 Sandglass Drive had surrendered names before, but never like this. On May 9th, forensic analysts recovered the last intact mirror from the house's master bedroom, a piece that had once hung above a defunct fireplace, long thought decorative. Behind it, hidden by adhesive wallpaper and decades of neglect, was a vertical seam just wide enough for a human hand to slip between. And in that space, nestled within old newspaper insulation and a fragment of burnt carpet, was a name etched directly into the inner wood frame, written in looping cursive, Annalisa, not Rachel, not Lila. This was a third name, another girl, another ghost. Sierra stared at it, jaw tight. "She's not in any report," she said. "Not on any missing persons list tied to this house. Not mentioned by Maddox, not by Ethan." Holloway exhaled, which means she came before. The wood was dated, aged, weathered beyond the 1990s remodel, likely scratched into place sometime in the early 1980s, possibly earlier. The implication was devastating. Maddox hadn't started his obsession with Rachel. She was never the first. She had simply been one of the few who survived long enough to remember her name. Annalisa was the first voice no one had listened to. Later that afternoon, Sierra found herself back in the local library, poring through regional newspaper archives from 1979 to 1985, missing girls, vanished teens, unsolved cases that carried no closure. One article stopped her cold. Local teen disappears on way home from dance class. Family devastated. The name, Annalisa Breen, age 15. Disappeared August 14th, 1983. Last seen walking past Harborview Lane, a road that no longer existed but once connected directly to where Sandglass Drive was later developed. "She passed within 2 blocks of the property," Sierra whispered, fingers trembling as she traced the faded photo. In the image, Annalisa smiled, holding a bouquet of plastic roses, hair curled at the ends, braces faintly visible behind her teeth. The caption read, "Annalisa, moments after her final recital." Sierra folded the paper and slid it into her folder. At the precinct, Holloway matched the handwriting carved behind the fireplace to that of a school journal submitted by Annalisa in 1982, preserved by her mother and donated to a local youth foundation. It was a match, confirmed by 2 independent analysts. The confirmation was a revelation. Maddox had operated the house for nearly 2 decades before the Monroes ever stepped inside. He hadn't just created it as a trap, it had evolved, been perfected. What began with Annalisa had sharpened with Lila, and with Rachel, something had finally cracked. The forensic dig continued. Beneath the Rose Room floorboards, a shallow cavity was discovered. Wrapped in polyethylene tarp and filled with damp paperbacks, loose index cards, and one Polaroid buried in the center. It showed the same Rose Room setup, but the wallpaper was different. It wasn't pink. It was light blue, with faded star patterns. The girl inside it wasn't Rachel, and she wasn't Lila. Her hair was darker, her face older. She sat stiffly on a small cot, arms crossed, looking directly into the camera like she already knew what was going to happen. On the back, again in red marker, "She learns faster than the others. May not need full conditioning." It was signed. DL. Holloway turned to Sierra. "That's not Maddox." She frowned. "No, it's not. And it's not Ethan. Then who?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Because if Maddox had not been acting alone, then the system that created the Rose Room went deeper than a single deviant mind. They were looking not at a serial abduction, but a blueprint. And someone else had the blueprints. That night, Sierra found herself rewatching the footage from the crawlspace camera, scrubbing frame by frame through the images of the hidden tunnel where Rachel had once escaped. And there, 3 frames in, something flickered, a marking on the underside of the exit plank. She zoomed in, enhanced, froze. A symbol, barely visible but distinct. An infinity loop with a single vertical line through it. "Holloway!" she called, her voice urgent. "I think we've seen this before." He leaned in. "Where?" She opened her laptop and pulled up one of Maddox's old property applications from the county assessor's office, an auxiliary permit filed in 1994 to repair the home's wiring. In the upper right corner, stamped in faded ink, the same symbol. Not a contractor mark, Not a city seal, a personal emblem, a signature. The house had been branded, claimed, possibly even authorized. Holloway sat back, face paling. He was part of something, Sierra nodded. Or following instructions? The idea chilled them both. Maddox hadn't simply built a house of horrors. He had followed a design. A design tested with Annalisa, honed with Lila, documented through Rachel. And now, with each discovery, it was as if the house itself was unraveling the story Maddox had died trying to bury. But the last revelation that day didn't come from an old file, or a crawl space, or a fingerprint. It came from a woman. That evening, as Sierra prepared to leave the precinct, a quiet knock came at the side entrance. A woman in her 60s, wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying a brown envelope, asked to speak to someone about the girl in the mirror. Sierra's heart nearly stopped. "Who are you?" The woman looked down, then back up with eyes that had seen decades of silence. "My name is Rachel Monroe." And in that instant, the house at 42 Sandglass Drive was no longer a legend. It was a crime scene with a living survivor, a witness who remembered, a name that had survived the walls. For a moment, Sierra just stared at her, unsure whether the exhaustion in the woman's voice was real or just the byproduct of too many sleepless nights and 1,000 false leads. But then the woman stepped forward into the light, and everything changed. The lines beneath her eyes matched the bone structure in the DMV photo from 1996. The shape of her nose, the subtle tilt in her shoulders, everything aligned. But it was the scar, just below her left ear, faint but unmistakable, that made Sierra's knees buckle. The same scar visible in one of the mirror photographs recovered from the crawl space. Holloway appeared from down the hall, holding 2 coffee mugs, and stopped cold when he saw the woman standing in front of Sierra. He set the mugs down without a word. "We need a secure room," Sierra said quietly. "Now." 10 minutes later, Rachel Monroe sat in interview room 3A, hands folded neatly, her hair pulled back in a way that revealed the full curvature of her face, no longer hidden by the mirror's edge. She placed the brown envelope on the table. "Everything I have is in here," she said. "Everything I couldn't forget. Everything he made sure I'd remember." She didn't mean Holloway, and she didn't mean Ethan. She meant Maddox. Sierra slid the envelope toward herself and opened it. Inside, 3 pages from a child's notebook, yellowed and brittle. On each, a detailed map, crude but shockingly accurate, of the Rose Room layout as it existed before renovation. She had drawn the vent system, the wire conduits, and the sound traps in the walls. "He taught me the house," Rachel said. "Said I should know it better than anyone, because if I failed the trial, I'd end up in the walls." Holloway sat down slowly. "What trial?" She looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were bloodshot, but unwavering. "The obedience loop." "You mean the conditioning?" "No," she said firmly. "It wasn't about behavior. It was about breakage. He wanted to see how long it would take until I forgot my own name. How long until I answered to the one he gave me." Sierra's voice cracked. "What did he call you?" Rachel's gaze flicked away. "Clara. He said Rachel had died, that I'd been reborn. But I never let go. I scratched it behind the mirror because I knew the mirror was his favorite thing. He always checked it. He always looked in it before coming in. He was obsessed with how I saw myself. If I started seeing Clara in the reflection, he said the loop was complete." She folded her hands again. "But I never saw her. I only ever saw me." Holloway opened his notebook. "Rachel, we found someone else, a girl named Annalisa." Rachel blinked. The name was carved behind the bedroom fireplace. A pause. Then, slowly, she nodded. "She was real." "You knew her?" "Only by her voice. She was there when I arrived. But she was already broken. She didn't speak much, just hummed, like she was trying to drown out the sound of her own name." Rachel's hands trembled. "One night, she stopped humming. I never saw her again. He said she'd graduated." Sierra whispered. "Graduated to what?" Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. "To silence." Holloway slid a photo across the table, the recovered image of Lila Hartley, seated on the motel bed with her faceless doll. Rachel stared at it for a long time. "That's not me," she said. "But he showed me that picture, said it was his first success." "We found her," Sierra said quietly. "She didn't make it." Rachel looked down. "None of them ever did." Holloway leaned forward. "But you did. You escaped." Rachel nodded. "I waited. I memorized every step, every door creak, every time he forgot to lock something. And when the cough started, when he got weak, I moved. I didn't even think. I ran through the crawl space, through the storm drain, and didn't stop until I found a farm road and a truck driver who didn't ask questions. He thought I was on drugs. Took me as far as Joliet, Illinois. I never gave my name. She paused. I couldn't, because I didn't know if he was watching. Holloway whispered, "All this time, where have you been?" Rachel gave a faint, bitter smile. Everywhere and nowhere. Changed my name, changed my hair, learned to make myself invisible. I thought if I stayed quiet, the house would stay buried. Her voice broke. But I saw the news. About the girl. About the bones. And I knew the walls had finally started talking. Sierra reached out gently. "You remembered your name, Rachel, and that saved you." Rachel shook her head. "No, what saved me was knowing the house wasn't just his. It was theirs." Holloway froze. "Theirs?" Rachel looked up, eyes full of dread. "He used to take phone calls, late, quiet, but I could hear. He called the person architect, said the new draft had been approved, said the test house is live." She took a shaky breath. "And the worst part? The way he said it. Like it was bigger than us. Like we were just one of many." Holloway leaned back slowly. "You're saying that there could be more houses?" Rachel nodded. "I'm saying there already are." And as the words echoed through the concrete room, the three of them sat in the silence of truth finally unearthed, knowing that the girl in the mirror had not only escaped her prison, but had returned to lead them to something far darker. Something still alive, still hidden, still watching Dot. The name dropped like a lead weight between them. The architect. And neither Holloway nor Sierra spoke for a full minute. Rachel's voice had grown thinner, more distant, as if merely saying it had taken something from her. "I only heard him once," she murmured, eyes locked on the table. "On the phone, a man. His voice wasn't loud. It was smooth, educated, no accent. He asked about compliance curves. Said the Rose Room had yielded higher retention than the Forest module." Holloway frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" Rachel looked up at him, eyes hollow. "I think we were experiments, behavioral trials. He wasn't trying to break us for revenge or pleasure. He was collecting data, watching how far people can be pushed before they forget who they are." She tapped her temple gently. "How long a name can survive inside the dark." Sierra stared at her, pulse pounding. "Rachel, why didn't you come forward before now?" The woman let out a laugh, bitter and small. "Because who would believe me? A woman with no ID, no paper trail, walking into a police station saying she escaped a house designed by a sociopath who talked to someone named the architect. You'd put me in a psych ward before I finished the sentence." She reached into her coat and pulled out a wrinkled card. "But when I saw your name in the news, Detective Holloway, I remembered. That name came up in Maddox's files. He had a binder labeled Failures. Inside was a note, Holloway inquiry, deflected source removed. That's when I knew I couldn't stay hidden anymore." Holloway took the card and turned it over. On the back, someone had written a string of numbers and letters. At first, he thought it was a serial code, but Sierra leaned in, brow furrowed. "That's a server address," Rachel nodded. "He used it to log something. I saw him do it after every session. He had a laptop, kept it under lock, logged into something called Omnicrux. Said it was secure, said it was protected by someone above the government. I thought he was lying. I prayed he was lying." But Holloway had already pulled out his phone. The moment he entered the address into the secure proxy, his screen went black, then loaded a white logo. A stylized infinity loop pierced vertically down the center. The same symbol they'd found beneath the trap door. Sierra leaned in. "That's not a server. That's a network." The page was locked with credentials, but just the header told them enough. "Omnicrux Behavioral Systems Level 4. Access required." Holloway killed the connection immediately. "We need federal help. Now." Rachel flinched. "No. If you go to them, they'll kill this. Bury it. You think no one knew what Maddox was doing? You think this kind of house, this level of engineering, happened without permits, without noise? Someone protected it. Someone higher." "You're saying that this was sanctioned?" Sierra asked, horrified. "I'm saying it was allowed. Or maybe even funded. And if you alert them now, before we know how deep this goes, they'll erase the rest, and everyone in it." That night, Holloway drove alone to the property one last time. The house stood silent, swaddled in tarps and floodlights. He walked the perimeter, flashlight steady, then paused by the crawlspace vent. Inside, he could still feel it. The echo of voices long gone. He crouched down and whispered, "How many of you were there?" A wind passed through the hollow of the house, carrying with it the faint rattle of something shifting deep in the foundation, as if the walls themselves were answering. The next morning, Sierra returned with a USB clone of the server handshake. Their tech analyst, Roy Chen, managed to isolate a subdomain with archived session logs, encrypted but timestamped. There were dozens. The earliest dated back to 1982. The most recent, 6 months ago. The house was still active, Sierra whispered. After Maddox died, Roy nodded grimly. It was automated. The logs show entries like conditioning resumed, sub-G, a 17, compliance drop, sub-J, a 19, and then, he paused. Then, subject A20 transferred to Western Site. Holloway stood. There's another house. Rachel stepped forward. There's more than one. I think there always were. I think Maddox wasn't the builder. He was the caretaker. She took a breath. The house didn't die when I escaped. It evolved. And someone kept it alive. Holloway turned to Sierra. If A20 was just moved 6 months ago, that means someone, right now, is still inside. The room went still. The horror that had once been historical, archived, and rotting in the foundations of a single home was now living, breathing, and ongoing. And at its center was a man they knew only by a title, the architect. A man who had never been caught, never been seen, who existed not in fingerprints or facial recognition scans, but in blueprints and silence, a ghost in drywall, a name behind names. And if they wanted to find him, they would have to go beyond the house, beyond the system, beyond the safety of what the law could touch. Because the real story hadn't ended when Rachel escaped. It had only just begun. It began with a freight manifest. Nothing glamorous, nothing cinematic. Just a dull spreadsheet tucked inside the metadata of one Omnicrux archive Roy Chen had decrypted, dated March 3rd, 6 months ago. The column headers were vague: unit ID, transfer code, site exit, new host grid, subject class, and finally a small field labeled simply handler ID. Most of the entries were alphanumeric gibberish, designed to look meaningless. But line 28 listed something terrifyingly specific. A 20 cleared for relocation to grid R2, handler ID, Arch LMN. Sierra felt her stomach drop. Handler ID, Arch. She whispered the rest. The architect. Roy cross-referenced grid R2 and uncovered a decommissioned government logistics zone in Marfa, Texas, abandoned since 2003. Officially, it had been used for FEMA testing and border training ops, but a secondary permit filed in 2006 indicated structural repurposing by a private contractor, name redacted. Holloway leaned over the map. That's where the next house is. Rachel stood by the window, her voice calm, deadly certain. That's where the next victim is. They flew out that evening on an unmarked charter. No state or federal declaration, no warrant, no trail. Holloway had cashed in every favor he'd buried across his career. Sierra wore civilian clothes, kept her badge hidden. Rachel carried nothing but a worn notebook and a vial of sand from the crawlspace she'd escaped, something she said helped her remember what she'd survived. They arrived in Marfa under the cover of pre-dawn fog. The logistics grid was a ghost town, flat warehouses, abandoned containers, and fences long overtaken by prairie. But one structure stood out. Warehouse 12, recently re-roofed, fresh tracks near the entrance. A sensor still blinking red on the gate. Holloway crouched by the outer keypad. "It's been active," he said. Sierra slid behind a post, raising her scope. "East-facing camera is dummy," she said, "but west corner still tracks motion. These aren't old systems. They've been maintained." Rachel didn't flinch. She walked directly to the back wall, fingers brushing the paneling. "This is how my room started," she said. "Empty. Then came the layers." "Layers?" Holloway asked. "Soundproofing, lights, internal locks. Maddox always said a real house doesn't trap you with bars. It traps you with routine." They circled the perimeter, looking for an entrance. A faint hum came from below, barely audible, but Rachel heard it instantly. "That's HVAC, but not for this structure." She knelt, pressed her ear to the ground, and whispered, "It's underneath." It took them an hour to find the service hatch, camouflaged beneath an old maintenance trailer. Sierra pulled it open slowly, revealing a tunnel wide enough for one person at a time, reinforced with steel struts. Holloway led the descent. The temperature dropped. The air turned sterile. Lights flickered on automatically every 5 feet. As they reached the bottom, the corridor split into 3. Rachel pointed left. "That's the orientation chamber. Always first." They moved silently, weapons drawn, but nothing could prepare them for what they saw inside. The walls were white, blindingly so, and the room was pristine. A hospital bed, a table, a mirror, but this one was two-way, visible from both sides. The camera in the upper corner blinked. Active. Recording. Rachel moved toward the mirror, touched the glass, and said, "This is where they rename you." Holloway turned to Sierra. "Record everything." They pressed deeper into the structure. Each room reflected a stage. Deprivation, reward, sleep control. It was no longer just a prison. It was a machine, a behavioral crucible. And at the center of it all was a locked steel door marked only by a single character. Omega. Omega. "This is it," Rachel whispered. "This is where the loop ends." Holloway entered the override code Roy had extracted from the server trail. The lock hissed. The door slid open, and there, inside a room no larger than a shipping container, sat a girl. Maybe 14. Hair buzzed, eyes wide, a name tag hung from her wrist. A 20. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just whispered, "Is it over?" Rachel stepped forward, voice breaking. "Yes, baby! It's over!" But Sierra was already scanning the room. 2 things made her freeze. First, on the wall, the same infinity symbol with a vertical slash. And second, beneath the girl's bed, tucked into a steel vent, a folder. Holloway pulled it out. Inside were blueprints. Not just of this house, but 5 more. Sites marked R3 through R7. All with status. Active. And, in red pen across the top page, Phase 2 scheduled, A21 in processing. Sierra whispered, "There's another one." Rachel's hand gripped the vial of sand tighter. "There always is." And as the sirens began to sound outside, motion sensors triggered by their presence, they realized the most horrifying truth of all. They weren't the first to break in. They were the first to get out. But the house, the network, the architect had already moved on. The next girl was waiting, somewhere, alone, watching the mirror, forgetting her name, Dot. They ran, not out of fear, but purpose, each hallway now familiar, each alarm just another heartbeat pounding in their ears. Holloway carried the girl, A20, who clung to him like a shadow that refused to be left behind. Sierra covered the rear, pistol steady, adrenaline surging. And Rachel never once looked back. She moved with clarity, with something more ancient than instinct, like memory was now guiding her feet. As they emerged from the substructure into the dawn-drenched Texas wasteland, the sirens died out. Silence returned. But it was not peace. It was the silence of a system that had been seen, exposed. They reached the SUV and pulled out fast, dirt clouding the rearview mirror, kicking up the dust of decades. Sierra looked back once. No pursuers, no guards, no confrontation, just stillness. "They didn't try to stop us," she murmured. Holloway stared ahead grimly. "Because they already relocated." Rachel sat beside the girl in the back seat, wiping her face gently with a cloth. "Do you know your name?" The girl hesitated, blinked, then, barely audible, she whispered, "Janie?" Rachel nodded, a tear falling freely. "That's beautiful, Janie. You hold on to that. You fight for that." At the safe house 2 hours north, Sierra began uploading everything. Photos, blueprints, site coordinates, metadata, from Roy's decrypted server access. The logs showed timestamps dating back 41 years. It hadn't been one man's operation. It had been a program, a cycle, a rotating structure designed to erase names and harvest obedience. But now, they had enough to burn it down. "If we take this public," Sierra said, "they'll come for us." "They already are," Holloway replied. "But now, we're not alone." Rachel stood in the doorway, holding Janie's hand. "I'll testify," she said, "on everything. On Maddox, on Omnicrux, on the architect." She looked at Janie. "Because no one gave that girl back her name. She had to remember it herself." For weeks they worked in silence, assembling the evidence, redacting their locations, coordinating leaks to investigative journalists, offshore servers, whistleblower networks. The first article dropped on a Tuesday morning. Headline, "Inside the Obedience Houses, Former Victims Speak Out on Secret Psychological Trials." It exploded across the country. 2 days later, Senator Halderman demanded a federal investigation. By the weekend, anonymous donors were funding survivor protection programs. But the network retaliated. Holloway's home was broken into, files stolen. Sierra's brakes were cut, caught just in time. Roy vanished for 6 hours and reappeared in an alley with a concussion and no memory of what happened. And Rachel? She received a letter. No envelope. Just a folded sheet slid under her motel door in the middle of the night. It read, "You were not the only one who remembered," and below it, a symbol, the infinity loop. She held the note over the bathroom sink and lit it with a match, watching the flame consume it inch by inch. Then she looked into the mirror, and for the first time in 27 years, she saw herself. Whole, unbroken, named. At the final press conference, Sierra stood beside Rachel as she read from her statement. This was never about one house or one man. This was about silence, engineered, institutional, systematic silence. I was just one girl, but I survived. I remembered. And now, so will the world. Holloway retired 1 month later. Sierra transferred to a federal task force investigating non-sanctioned behavioral research. And Rachel? She founded a sanctuary. A place for girls who'd forgotten their names to write them down again. On mirrors, on walls, on anything that wouldn't forget. They never found the architect. The last digital trace of Omnicrux vanished 2 hours before the article went live. But from time to time, Sierra would receive a letter. No return address. Inside, photos of blueprints or new coordinates, or a single name, typed in block letters with a simple handwritten phrase below it. She's still alive. The last one arrived exactly 1 year later. The photo showed a warehouse in Utah. On the front wall, painted in red, "I remember." Sierra closed the file and whispered into the quiet, "So do we." Because in the end, it wasn't the walls or the mirrors or the tunnels that defined the story. It was the names. The names that survived the silence. The names they could never take. The names they thought had vanished, but came back burning. Rachel, Lila, Annalisa, Janie, and now the world knew them all. Some names are whispered into the dark and never heard again. Others survive, etched into mirrors, hidden behind walls, and carried in the hearts of those who refuse to forget. Rachel, Janie, Annalisa, they weren't just victims. They were voices. And their voices have now echoed far beyond the cold walls that tried to contain them. This story is not just about what was lost, but what was found. Identity. Truth. And above all, the courage to remember. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share their names. Speak them. Because sometimes the most powerful form of justice is refusing to forget.